Screams of terror filled the palace halls as reports flooded in of humanity's unstoppable conquest of the galaxy. The Lurian Empire, a once mighty kingdom, teetered on the brink of collapse. King Zorthan paced his throne room, hands trembling, his mind consumed by visions of human warships darkening the skies above his capital. Desperate times called for desperate measures. The king's advisors pleaded for diplomacy, but Zorthan saw only one path forward: capture a human, learn their secrets, and use that knowledge to crush the Terran Federation. When a small spacecraft crashed on the outskirts of the city and a human diplomat was taken prisoner, the king saw his chance. Princess Xanth watched her father descend into madness, his obsession with the human captive growing by the day. She knew that torture and interrogation would only breed more hatred and fear. As whispers of rebellion spread through the palace, Xanth made a fateful decision. She would defy her father's orders and meet with the prisoner in secret, searching for a way to bridge the gap between their warring civilizations. The princess stood outside the human cell, heart pounding, hand poised to open the door. She knew that the future of her people hung in the balance. If she could find a path to peace, the Lurian Empire might yet survive. But if she failed, her kingdom would be ground to dust beneath the boot of human conquest. With a deep breath, Xanth stepped forward, ready to face whatever fate awaited her on the other side. Princess Xanth's heart raced as she slipped into the dank cell where the human diplomat was held. Matthew Sullivan, battered but unbroken, looked up at her with wary eyes. "Come to interrogate me further?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Xanth shook her head. "No, I've come to talk, to find a way to end this madness before it consumes us all." Over the next hour, they talked in hushed tones, sharing their hopes and fears. Matthew spoke of Earth, of the Terran Federation's desire for peaceful exploration and cooperation. Xanth listened intently, seeing in him not a conqueror but a potential ally. "My father is blinded by fear," she said, "but if I can arrange for you to escape, to meet with your leaders and begin peace talks—" Matthew leaned forward, his chains clinking. "It's a dangerous gamble, but it might be our only chance." Together they crafted a plan. Xanth staged a diversion, setting a fire in a distant wing of the palace. In the chaos, Matthew slipped free, following her whispered instructions to a waiting spacecraft. As he climbed aboard, Xanth pressed a data chip into his hand. "Coordinates for a rendezvous point, neutral territory. Bring your diplomats and I'll bring mine." With a nod, Matthew sealed the hatch and launched into the night sky. Xanth watched him go, hope warring with fear in her heart. Days later, Matthew stood before Admiral Grayson, pleading his case for peace. The hardened commander listened skeptically, his eyes narrowed. "You're asking me to trust the word of a Lurian princess? After all they've done?" Matthew met his gaze steadily. "I'm asking you to take a chance, to find a way forward that doesn't end in slaughter." Admiral Grayson sighed, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "Very well, set up the meeting. But if this is a trap—" "It's not!" Matthew's voice rang with conviction. "I stake my life on it." As preparations for the summit began, Xanth faced her own challenges. Her father grew increasingly suspicious, his paranoia fueled by the whispered poison of Lord Krax. She deflected his questions, all the while gathering what information she could on Lurian battle plans and troop movements. When the day of the rendezvous finally arrived, both Xanth and Matthew boarded their ships with trepidation. As the airlocks hissed open and they stepped out into the cavernous docking bay, their eyes met across the gulf that divided their peoples. Two factions, each armed and wary, watched as the princess and the diplomat moved to the center of the room. They clasped hands, a gesture of trust and common purpose. Around them, the future balanced on a razor's edge. War on one side, peace on the other. The fate of galaxies would be decided here, in this moment. With a shared breath, Xanth and Matthew began to speak, their words the first fragile threads in a bridge across the stars. As the stolen spacecraft hurtled through the void, Princess Xanth clutched the armrests of her seat, her fist clenched with tension. Beside her, Matthew Sullivan worked feverishly at the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration as he navigated the damaged vessel towards the nearest Terran outpost. We'll make it, he said, his voice tight. We have to. Xanth nodded, her mind racing with the implications of Lord Crax's coup. Her father, imprisoned. Her people, led astray by a tyrant's lies. The fragile peace she and Matthew had worked so hard to build, shattered in an instant. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew glanced at her, his eyes filled with a mix of commitment and uncertainty. We regroup, we gather allies, and we find a way to stop Crax before he plunges the galaxy into war. As they approached the outpost, a squadron of Terran fighters fell into formation around their battered ship. Matthew hailed them on the comm, his voice steady as he identified himself, and requested permission to dock. Minutes later, they stepped out onto the hangar deck, surrounded by a sea of wary faces. Admiral Grayson pushed through the crowd, his expression grim. Sullivan, Princess Xanth, he nodded to each in turn. I received your message. What the hell happened out there? Over the next hour, in a secure briefing room, Xanth and Matthew laid out the events of the past few days. They spoke of the progress they had made, the common ground they had found, and the hopes they had nurtured for a lasting peace. Then, in halting tones, they described Lord Crax's betrayal and the shattering of that dream. Admiral Grayson listened intently, his teeth gritted. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard. This changes everything. If Crax consolidates his power, we could be facing a full-scale war within weeks. We can't let that happen, Xanth said, her voice fierce. My people are not our enemy. They're victims of Crax's lies and manipulation. Agreed, Matthew said, but we'll need more than just words to stop him. We need a plan. Over the next days and weeks, they worked tirelessly to forge an alliance, reaching out to factions within both the Terran Federation and the Lurian Empire who opposed Crax's rule. They gathered intelligence, pooled resources, and began to sketch out a daring operation to remove the tyrant from power and restore Princess Xanth to her rightful place. But even as their plans took shape, Lord Crax's grip on the Lurian Empire tightened. His forces, bolstered by a massive propaganda campaign and a ruthless crackdown on dissent, seemed all but invincible. With each passing day, the specter of war loomed larger, casting a pall over the galaxy. Through it all, Xanth and Matthew remained steadfast in their dedication to find a path to peace. They worked side by side, their bond deepening as they shared the burdens of leadership and the scars of battle. In stolen moments, they found solace in each other's company, drawing strength from a connection that transcended the barriers of species and culture. As they stood on the brink of their most daring gambit yet, a covert strike to liberate King Zorthan and rally the Lurian people against Crax, Xanth turned to Matthew, her eyes shining with a fierce dedication. Together? She asked, extending her hand. Matthew clasped it firmly, his gaze locked on hers. Together, until the end. With a shared nod, they turned to face the challenges ahead, knowing that the fate of galaxies rested on their shoulders. The mission would be grueling and treacherous, the odds stacked against them at every turn. But in that moment, standing side by side, they knew that they would never stop fighting for the chance to build a better future. Not just for their own peoples, but for all the stars in the sky. The Intrepid's hull shuddered as another volley of Lurian plasma fire grazed its shields. Xanth gripped the tactical console, her eyes fixed on the swirling holographic display of the battle raging around them. Beside her, Matthew barked orders into the ship's comm system, coordinating the human fleet's defense against Lord Crax's pursuing forces. Admiral Grayson's gruff voice cut through the chaos. We've bought you some time, Princess, but we need to regroup and gather more strength before we can take on Crax directly. Xanth nodded, her mind racing. I have contacts, loyalists who've gone into hiding. If we can reach them, we might stand a chance. Do it, Grayson said. Sullivan, I want you working your diplomatic channels. We need every ally we can get. Over the next weeks, as the Intrepid darted from system to system, Xanth and Matthew threw themselves into their tasks. Encrypted transmissions flew back and forth across the stars. Clandestine meetings were held in shadowy cantinas on frontier worlds. Slowly but surely, a network of resistance began to form. On a desolate moon base, Xanth clasped arms with General Trin, her father's most trusted military advisor. The grizzled Lurian's mandibles clicked with barely suppressed fury. "The usurper will pay for his treachery, Your Highness. My forces stand ready." Elsewhere, Matthew stood before a gathering of human world representatives, his voice passionate. "The Lurian people are not our enemy. They've been deceived, manipulated by a power-hungry tyrant. We have a chance to forge a lasting peace, but we must act now." As their allied forces grew, so too did the weight of opposition. Lord Crax's propaganda machine worked overtime, flooding the airwaves with tales of human atrocities and Xanth's supposed betrayal. The Lurian homeworlds seethed with xenophobic anger. The Resistance's first true test came when Admiral Vox's fleet ambushed a human supply convoy near the Centauri Rift. Xanth watched from the Intrepid's bridge as the battle unfolded, her heart in her throat. Human ships danced and weaved through the void, their new plasma artillery cannons blazing. A small contingent of rebel Lurian fighters dove into the fray, their unconventional tactics catching Vox forces off guard. When the last enemy cruiser went dark, a ragged cheer went up from the crew. Xanth allowed herself a small smile, but the enormity of the task ahead took a toll on her. In the wake of their victory, Xanth and Matthew found themselves deep in strategy sessions with Admiral Grayson and the other Resistance leaders. Maps and tactical projections filled the air around them. "A direct assault on the capital is suicide," Grayson growled. "Crax's defenses are too strong." Matthew leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "What if we go after Crax himself? A surgical strike, in and out before they know what hit them." Xanth's pulse quickened at the audacity of the plan. It was risky, perhaps foolhardy, but it might be their only chance. Days later, as the combined human and Lurian rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the Lurian throne world, Xanth stood shoulder to shoulder with Matthew in the troop carrier's hold. Around them, grim-faced human marines and Lurian fighters checked their weapons one last time. The ship bucked as it entered the atmosphere, ground fire peppering its hull. Xanth met Matthew's eyes, saw her own drive reflected there. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The bay doors opened with a hiss, revealing the shattered skyline of the capital. Crax's loyalist troops swarmed the streets below. As one, the strike team surged forward, plunging into the maelstrom of urban combat. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Buildings crumbled under the onslaught. Xanth ducked and weaved, her royal guard training kicking in as she fought alongside her unlikely allies. "There!" General Trin's voice crackled over the comm. "The palace bunker. Crax is inside." They fought their way through layers of security, each step bringing them closer to their quarry. In a final, desperate push, they breached the inner sanctum. Lord Crax stood before them, snarling defiance. "You dare!" His words were cut short as stun bolts dropped him to the floor. Victory flared in Xanth's chest, but it was short-lived. "Xanth, look out!" Matthew's warning came a split second before he threw himself between her and the hidden assassin's blade. Time seemed to slow as Matthew crumpled, crimson blossoming across his chest. Xanth screamed, rage and fear fueling her as she dispatched the attacker with a savage burst from her weapon. As the Resistance forces withdrew, their unconscious prize in tow, Xanth cradled Matthew's head in her lap. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "We're not done yet." Even as hope bloomed with Crax's capture, a shadow loomed on the horizon. Reports flooded in of Admiral Vox assembling an armada unlike anything they had faced before. The true test of their fledgling alliance was yet to come. The Intrepid's medical bay hummed with activity as doctors worked to stabilize Matthew's condition. Xanth stood by his bedside, her fingers intertwined with his, her eyes never leaving his pale face. Admiral Grayson's gruff voice broke through her vigil. "Your Highness, we need you in the war room. Now!" Reluctantly, Xanth followed him to a chamber filled with holographic displays and grim-faced officers. The largest projection showed a vast armada, its ships stretching as far as the eye could see. Admiral Vox Loyalist Fleet, Grayson said, his voice tight. Largest concentration of Lurian warships ever assembled. They're coming for us and they're out for blood. Xanth's mandibles clicked in frustration. How long do we have? Hours at most. We're outnumbered and outgunned. This is it, Princess. The final showdown. The room erupted in heated debate. Voices raised, arguing strategies and contingencies. Xanth listened, her mind racing, weighing options against impossible odds. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Matthew, leaning heavily on a medic, limped into the war room. We can't match them ship for ship, he said, his voice weak but determined. But we have something they don't. All eyes turned to him as he detailed a daring plan. The Terran Federation's most advanced stealth weaponry, ghostly hunter-killer drones and virus bombs capable of overriding entire systems. Weapons of nightmare, born from humanity's darkest hours. Xanth met Matthew's gaze, seeing the weight of the decision in his eyes. She nodded, her voice steady. Do it. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. As Vox Armada appeared on long-range sensors, the Allied fleet moved into position. Xanth stood on the Intrepid's bridge, watching the enemy ships fill the view screen. All units execute, Grayson's voice rang out. A silent rain of virus munitions streaked across space, invisible until they struck their targets. Shields flickered and died. Weapon systems went dark. Entire dreadnoughts drifted, suddenly powerless. In their wake came the drones, spectral predators, slipping past disabled defenses. Explosions bloomed in silence, bathing the Intrepid's bridge in harsh light. But the Loyalists fought back with zealous fury. Particle lances lashed out, cutting through Allied ships. The space around them became a maelstrom of fire and debris. Alarms blared as a Loyalist cruiser locked onto Matthew's fighter. Xanth watched in horror as his ship tumbled, trailing fire, towards a desolate moon below. I'm going after him, she said, already moving towards the hangar bay. Grayson's protest died on his lips as he saw the commitment in her eyes. Xanth's shuttle screamed through the atmosphere, touching down near the twisted wreckage of Matthew's fighter. She found him alive but dazed, struggling to free himself from the cockpit. No sooner had she pulled him clear than plasma fire erupted around them, Vox elite boarders having followed them to the surface. Back to back, Xanth and Matthew fought, their movements fluid despite their injuries. Around them, their small band of defenders fell one by one to the relentless assault. A towering figure strode through the chaos, Admiral Vox himself, his armor gleaming, particle rifle raised. Time seemed to slow. Xanth saw Matthew falter, his wounds finally taking their toll. She saw Vox's finger tighten on the trigger. In that instant, muscle memory took over. The honor blade concealed at her wrist flashed out, a move taught by her mother, practiced countless times in secret. Vox's eyes widened in shock as the blade found the weak point in his armor. His dying scream echoed across the barren landscape, a sound of disbelief and fury. The Admiral's fall broke the spirit of his troops. Weapons clattered to the ground as they surrendered, the fight gone out of them. Xanth sank to her knees beside Matthew, cradling his head. His breathing was shallow, his skin ashen. She looked up at the sky where the remnants of both fleets hung motionless against the stars. The battle was over. The war won. But as Xanth held Matthew's broken form, she knew the true test was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.